Last night, something happened to you. Something you probably do not remember. Your brain disconnected your body from your muscles, flooded itself with chemicals, shut down the part of you that knows the difference between what is real and what is not, and then it made you hallucinate for about 2 hours. And you had no idea. You woke up this morning, you poured your coffee, you went about your business, and you never once stopped to ask, what the hell was that? I want you to sit with that for a second. Because if I told you there was a drug that did what sleep does to your brain, you would call it dangerous. If I told you there was a condition where a person loses voluntary muscle control, experiences vivid hallucinations, loses the ability to reason logically, cannot form reliable memories, and has no awareness that any of this is happening, you would say that sounds like a serious neurological disorder. But we do not call it a disorder, we call it dreaming. And every single one of us does it, every night, without exception. So the question I want to chase today is not why do we dream, because frankly nobody knows the full answer to that. And anyone who tells you they do is selling you something. The question I want to chase is more specific and I think more unsettling. What is physically happening inside your skull during a dream? What machinery is turning on? What machinery is turning off? And what does that tell us about the nature of the mind that is supposedly you during the day? Because once you see what the brain is actually doing during a dream, you start to wonder how much of your waking life is built on the same tricks. Let me start with what we know for sure, and the story of how we found it out is itself a little mystery. It is 1952. A graduate student named Eugene Aserinsky is sitting in a dim laboratory at the University of Chicago watching his 8-year-old son sleep. He has electrodes taped near the boy's eyes. The equipment is old, temperamental, barely functional. Aserinsky is broke. His supervisor, Nathaniel Kleitman, is one of the most distinguished sleep researchers alive, but the equipment budget is almost nothing. So Aserinsky is using a borrowed room in the physiology department and a machine that keeps breaking down. Now, Kleitman had originally given Aserinsky a fairly mundane assignment: study the blinking rates of infants as they fall asleep. Count the blinks, plot the curves, routine dissertation work. But Aserinsky, who was stubborn in the way that good scientists sometimes are, got interested in the eye movements themselves, not just blinks, full movements, and he decided to use the electrooculogram, which measures the tiny electrical potential between the front and back of the eyeball, to track what the eyes were doing through the whole night. Nobody had done this systematically before. The boy falls asleep. The pens on the recording device are supposed to show slow, gentle drifts as the eyes relax, but instead something unexpected happens. The pens start swinging back and forth, fast and jerky, as if the child is looking around the room. Aserinsky walks over to check. The boy's eyes are closed. He is sound asleep. The pens keep swinging. Here is the moment where science hangs in the balance. Aserinsky assumes it is the machine. Of course, the thing is a wreck. He has been fighting with it for months. The obvious conclusion is that the electrodes are picking up noise, or the amplifier is drifting, or some wire is loose. That is the rational thing to think, and most people would have stopped there. But Aserinsky does not stop. He watches, and he notices something else. When the pens are swinging wildly, the boy's breathing changes. It gets irregular, faster. His heart rate picks up, and then after a while the pens settle down, the breathing calms, everything goes quiet, and then maybe 90 minutes later it happens again. The wild pen movements, the breathing, the heart rate, like clockwork. This is not a machine malfunction. Machines do not malfunction in 90-minute cycles that correlate with breathing and heart rate. This is biology. Something real is happening inside the sleeping brain, and it is happening on a schedule. So Aserinsky wakes the boy during one of these episodes and asks him what was happening. And the child says he was dreaming. Aserinsky tries it with adults. 20 of them. Same result. Wake someone during those jerky eye movement periods, and roughly 80% of the time they report a vivid dream. Wake them during the quiet periods, and they mostly report nothing, or something vague and formless, like thinking in the dark. He and Kleitman published this in 1953. A tiny paper in Science. Barely a page and a half. They were paying their adult subjects $3 a night, which tells you something about the budget. And that little paper cracks open the entire field of modern sleep research. Before that paper, the prevailing view of sleep was almost comically wrong. Scientists assumed sleep was a passive state. The brain shuts down, Consciousness fades, like a television losing power, the picture shrinking to a dot and then nothing. Sleep was absence. It was the brain's off switch. And dreams were considered epiphenomenal, a fancy word meaningless side effect, like the noise a car engine makes. The engine does something useful, and the noise just comes along for the ride. After Aserinsky's paper, we knew the truth was far stranger. The sleeping brain is anything but quiet. It has secret phases, hidden rhythms, scheduled eruptions of activity as intense and organized as anything that happens during the day. And it is during those eruptions that the most extraordinary phenomenon in all of neuroscience occurs. The brain, sealed inside a dark skull, disconnected from the world, builds entire realities from nothing and projects them onto a sleeping mind that cannot tell the difference. What Aserinsky and Kleitman had stumbled onto was a distinct state of the brain that we now call REM sleep, rapid eye movement sleep. And the first thing to understand is that this is not just light sleep or almost awake. It is something else entirely. A French researcher named Michel Jouvet figured this out a few years later and called it paradoxical sleep, which is honestly a much better name, because what is happening is genuinely paradoxical. The brain, by most electrical measures, looks like it is wide awake. The cortex is buzzing with high-frequency activity, but the body is almost completely paralyzed. You have a brain that thinks it is awake, trapped in a body that cannot move. That is the paradox. That is what makes this whole business so strange. And your brain does this to you 4 or 5 times every single night, in cycles of roughly 90 minutes. The first bout of REM might last only 10 minutes. By morning, the final bout can stretch to 45 minutes or longer. Add it all up, and you spend roughly 2 hours every night in this state. Over a lifetime of, say, 75 years, that is something like 6 years of hallucinating while paralyzed. 6 years, let that number sit there. So what is happening during those 6 years? Let us open the skull, metaphorically, and look. The first thing you would notice, if you could watch the brain with an imaging machine during REM, is what lights up. The visual cortex at the back of the head blazes with activity. Not exactly the way it does when you are actually looking at something, but disturbingly close. Waves of electrical signals come crashing up from deep in the brainstem through a relay station called the lateral geniculate nucleus and slam into the visual cortex like surf hitting a cliff. These are called PGO waves, which stands for pontogeniculo-occipital. That is just a description of the highway the signal travels. Pons in the brainstem. Geniculate nucleus, the relay station. Occipital cortex, the visual processing center. Boom, 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 in rhythmic bursts, like someone is pounding on the door of the visual system and saying, "Make pictures, now." This is why dreams are visual. Not because you are seeing anything. Your eyes are closed, and the sensory information from the retina is largely blocked at the thalamus. The brain is generating images internally. It is running its own movie projector with the lens cap on. And the quality of this internal movie is remarkable. People report color, motion, faces, landscapes, depth, texture. The visual cortex does not seem to care very much whether the signal is coming from the outside world through the eyes or from the brainstem through PGO waves. It processes both with similar neural machinery. Some recent experiments have made this point even more dramatically. If you train a computer to recognize brain patterns associated with specific visual images, while a person is awake, watching pictures of faces or buildings or landscapes, and then you monitor their brain during the transition into sleep, the same computer can predict elements of what they are seeing in their dreams. The brain is running the same code, just with different input. The software is identical. Only the data source has changed. And this tells you something deep about vision itself, something that should make you uncomfortable in a useful way. You think of vision as a passive process. Light comes in, the brain records it, you see the world, but that is backwards. The brain is not a camera. The brain is a prediction machine. Most of what you see at any given moment is generated internally by the brain based on expectations, memories, and context. The raw sensory signal from the retina is actually rather crude, sparse, full of gaps. The brain fills in those gaps with predictions. During the day, those predictions are constrained and corrected by real incoming data. During a dream, the incoming data is gone. The prediction engine is running free, and what it produces is what you experience as a dream. The dream is not the brain doing something unusual. The dream is the brain doing what it always does, constructing a visual reality just without the leash of actual sensory input. That is a startling thought. It means your waking visual experience and your dream visual experience are not fundamentally different in kind. They differ in degree. One is constrained by external reality. The other is not. But the generative process, the machinery doing the constructing, is the same. But vision is just the surface. The real mystery goes deeper. While the visual cortex is putting on this light show, the emotional centers of the brain are going absolutely wild. The amygdala, which is the brain's alarm system, the region most associated with fear, anxiety, and threat detection, becomes extremely active during REM. In some brain imaging studies, amygdala activation during REM exceeds what you see during most waking emotional experiences. Think about that. The fear center of the brain is working harder while you are asleep and safe in bed than it does during many situations where you actually face real danger. And it is not just the amygdala. The anterior cingulate cortex, which processes emotional conflict, lights up. Regions associated with emotional memory, like the parahippocampal cortex, are buzzing. The limbic system, that whole ancient emotional architecture of the brain, is on fire. So the dreaming brain is emotional, intensely emotional. The statistics on dream content confirm this. When researchers collect hundreds of dream reports and categorize the emotions, negative emotions outnumber positive ones by a considerable margin. Fear and anxiety are the most commonly reported dream emotions, across cultures, across ages, across genders. Joy, excitement, and pleasure show up too, but they are in the minority. The dreaming brain skews dark, and there is a pattern to the darkness that is worth paying attention to. The most common dream scenarios are not random disasters. They cluster around a very specific set of themes that psychologists have documented extensively. Being chased by something or someone, falling from a height, arriving at an exam you have not prepared for, being naked in front of other people, losing your teeth, being trapped in a collapsing building, being unable to run even though you desperately need to. These themes show up in dream reports from New York, from Tokyo, from rural Brazil, from indigenous communities in Papua New Guinea. The specifics vary, the cast of characters changes, but the emotional architecture is remarkably consistent across the species. And these are not just random fears, they are ancient fears. They are ancient fears. Deep, primate fears that have been shaped by millions of years of natural selection. Fear of predators, fear of social humiliation, which in a tribal species means exile and death. Fear of falling, which for a tree-dwelling ancestor would be lethal. Fear of physical deterioration. These themes persist in the dreams of modern people who face none of these threats in their daily lives, which strongly suggests that the dream content is not a simple reflection of daily experience. It is running a much older program. All right, so we have vivid imagery and intense emotion. That alone would make for a powerful experience. But the real kicker, the thing that makes dreaming truly extraordinary, is what happens to the front of the brain. And this is the part I want you to pay very close attention to, because this is where the whole investigation pivots. During REM sleep, something specific happens to your prefrontal cortex, the part of your brain right behind your forehead. The prefrontal cortex is what makes you, or at least it is what makes you the version of you that you think you are. This is where your executive functions live. Planning, decision-making, self-awareness, working memory, the ability to hold two ideas in mind and compare them, the ability to evaluate whether what you are experiencing makes sense, the ability to say, wait a minute, that is impossible, when something impossible is happening, the ability to notice that you are thinking, which is a very strange ability when you stop and really consider it. Metacognition, the scientists call it. Thinking about thinking. During REM sleep, the dorsolateral prefrontal cortex, which is the specific region most responsible for rational evaluation, logical reasoning, and self-monitoring, goes largely dark. Its activity drops dramatically compared to waking levels. And we have a good idea why. The neurochemical explanation appears to be acetylcholine. During REM sleep, acetylcholine levels in the brain surge upward. Acetylcholine is doing useful things elsewhere in the brain during REM. It is helping activate the cortex, helping drive those vivid images. But it appears to have a direct inhibitory effect on the dorsolateral prefrontal neurons. So the very chemical that is powering the dream, the chemical that is generating all that vivid imagery and emotional intensity, is simultaneously shutting down the part of the brain that would be able to step back and say, hold on, none of this is real. Let me make sure you understand the full scope of what is happening here. It, it is not just one chemical. The whole neurochemical landscape shifts. Serotonin and norepinephrine, two neurotransmitters that are crucial for stable mood, focused attention, and the ability to anchor yourself in time and place, both drop to near zero during REM. During waking life, these chemicals help maintain what you might call the scaffolding of coherent consciousness. They help you remember where you are, what time it is, what just happened 5 minutes ago, and what you were intending to do next. Pull them out, and the scaffolding collapses. That is exactly what happens in a dream. The dream becomes a sequence of events with no stable sense of time, no reliable orientation, and no continuity of intention. Things jump. Scenes shift without warning. You were in your childhood kitchen, and now you are standing in a field somewhere, and now you are at work, and none of these transitions needed any explanation, because there was no part of your brain operational that would have demanded one. Your brain is not just generating a fantasy, it is selectively disabling the very systems that would allow you to detect the fantasy as a fantasy. Meanwhile, dopamine, the neurotransmitter associated with desire, motivation, seeking, and the pursuit of reward, appears to remain active and may even be elevated in some brain regions during REM. Some researchers have argued that dreaming itself might be driven partly by the dopaminergic system, because patients with damage to the dopamine pathways in the ventromedial frontal cortex lose the ability to dream entirely, even though their REM sleep cycles continue normally. So you can have REM sleep without dreams. The eyes still move, the body is still paralyzed, but the inner movie screen is blank. That is a very important clue because it tells us that REM sleep and dreaming, while usually occurring together, are actually separate phenomena controlled by different brain circuits. The brainstem runs REM. The forebrain, driven partly by dopamine, runs the dream. So let me assemble the full picture. During a dream, you have a brain with its visual cortex generating vivid images from internal signals. The emotional centers are cranked up, particularly the fear and anxiety circuits. The prefrontal cortex, the seat of rational evaluation and self-awareness, has been chemically suppressed. Serotonin and norepinephrine have vanished, collapsing your sense of time, place, and logical continuity. Dopamine is flowing, keeping the motivational and desire systems engaged, and the motor system has been disconnected from the body to prevent you from physically acting out any of this. That is not a sleeping brain, that is an engineering project. A very specific, very deliberate reconfiguration of the most complex organ in the known universe. And it is worth pausing here to appreciate the paralysis part, because it reveals something important about just how seriously the brain takes its own dreams. Specialized neurons in the brainstem actively inhibit the motor neurons in the spinal cord during REM sleep, producing what neurologists call atona. This is not relaxation, this is active suppression. The brain is sending a signal that says do not move, and when this system fails, you get a condition called REM sleep behavior disorder, where people physically act out their dreams. They punch, kick, run, scream, all while asleep. It can be violent. It can be dangerous. In some cases, it is one of the earliest symptoms of Parkinson's disease, appearing years or even decades before the motor symptoms show up. The fact that the brain evolved dedicated circuitry to paralyze the body during dreams tells you something. The dreams are real enough, from the brain's perspective, that without the paralysis system, the motor cortex would execute the dream as if it were reality. Your brain believes its own dream so thoroughly that it has to physically restrain itself from acting on it. There is a flip side to this paralysis that is equally revealing. Sometimes in the transition between sleep and waking, the paralysis lingers for a few seconds or minutes after consciousness returns. You wake up, you are aware of your room, you can see and hear, but you cannot move. You are trapped in a body that will not respond, and because the brain is still partly in dream mode, it sometimes generates hallucinations alongside the paralysis. People report seeing dark figures standing over them, feeling pressure on their chest, sensing a malevolent presence in the room. Across cultures and centuries, sleep paralysis has been interpreted as demon attacks, alien abductions, witch visitations, and supernatural encounters. The explanation is more prosaic but no less fascinating. The dreaming brain's hallucination system is still running, while the waking brain's sensory system has come back online, and the two overlap in the most disturbing way possible. Sleep paralysis is basically a timing error. The brain is switching modes, and two modules that are not supposed to run simultaneously end up overlapping. And the result terrifies people so profoundly that entire religious mythologies have been built around it. Think about that. A neurochemical timing glitch in the brainstem has been mistaken for millennia for evidence of the supernatural. That, right there, is a lesson in how easily the brain's own experience can be misinterpreted. And if a timing error during the sleep-wake transition can generate experiences so convincing that entire civilizations attributed them to demons, what does that say about the reliability of the brain as a witness to its own experience? So now we arrive at the central question of our investigation. If the brain is doing all of this, there must be a reason. 6 years of your life spent hallucinating in a paralyzed body, while the rational part of your mind is chemically disabled. Evolution does not preserve something this elaborate, this metabolically expensive, this physiologically complex, for no reason. Organisms that wasted energy on useless processes got outcompeted by organisms that did not. So what is the reason? And the honest answer is we are not sure. We have hypotheses, several of them. And they are not all compatible with each other, but each of them reveals something important about what the brain might be doing during the night. The first hypothesis is memory consolidation. There is strong evidence that REM sleep plays a role in sorting, strengthening, and reorganizing memories from the day. Experiments have shown that if you teach someone a new task, a maze, a sequence of movements, a set of facts, and then let them sleep, they perform better the next day than if they had stayed awake for the same number of hours. And if you deprive them specifically of REM sleep, the improvement is reduced. What seems to happen is that during REM, the hippocampus, which is the brain's short-term memory filing system, replays patterns of activity from the day. But it does not replay them faithfully, it remixes them. It combines fragments of recent experience with older memories, with emotional associations, with seemingly unrelated material. The hippocampus is talking to the cortex, shipping memories out of temporary storage and into longer-term networks. But the process is messy, creative, associative, which might explain why dream content is a jumble of real memories, half-remembered events, and bizarre fiction. The dream is not a replay, it is a remix. There is a lovely experiment where researchers had people play a virtual maze for hours before sleep. Some of the subjects dreamed about the maze, but they did not dream about it accurately. They dreamed distorted versions, mazes mixed with childhood memories, mazes in strange locations, mazes that turned into something else entirely. And those subjects, the ones who dreamed about the maze, even the distorted version, performed dramatically better on the maze the next day compared to subjects who did not dream about it. The dreaming brain was not replaying the experience. It was metabolizing it, digesting it, breaking it down and rebuilding it in a form the brain could use more efficiently. A second hypothesis, and this one has a delicious irony to it, came from Francis Crick. Yes, that Francis Crick, the same Crick who helped unravel the double helix structure of DNA. In 1983, Crick and his colleague Graham Mitchison proposed that dreaming is reverse learning, unlearning. The idea is that neural networks accumulate parasitic patterns over the course of the day, accidental connections, noise in the system, junk associations that if left unchecked could degrade the network's performance and even become the basis for obsessive or paranoid thoughts. And REM sleep, with its seemingly random bursts of cortical activation, erases those unwanted patterns. You dream in order to forget. The bizarre content of the dream is not meaningful. It is the garbage being taken out. Crick went so far as to argue that trying to remember your dreams might actually be counterproductive because you would be trying to hold on to the very information the brain was trying to discard. Now, I find this idea beautiful, elegant, very Crick. But it has problems. If dreams were purely random noise being expunged, you would expect dream content to be genuinely random, like television static. But it is not. Dream content is structured. It has characters, narratives, emotional arcs, recurring themes. It incorporates recent experiences and personal concerns in systematic ways. That does not look like garbage. That looks like processing. So Crick's idea might be part of the story. The brain probably does do some housekeeping during sleep, but it cannot be the whole story. And there is a related piece of evidence that I want to bring in here because it further complicates the picture. In recent years, researchers have discovered that during sleep, the brain literally cleans itself. The spaces between brain cells widen, and cerebrospinal fluid flushes through the tissue, carrying away metabolic waste products, including beta amyloid, a protein that accumulates in Alzheimer's disease. This is called the glymphatic system, and it operates most efficiently during deep sleep. So sleep is performing physical maintenance on the brain, washing away the molecular debris of the day's activity like a dishwasher running after the restaurant closes. But here is the critical distinction. The physical cleaning seems to happen primarily during deep non-REM sleep, the quiet phases. The dreaming phases, the REM episodes, seem to be doing something different, something more like reorganization than cleaning, more like restructuring the library than mopping the floor. Both are maintenance, but they are different kinds of maintenance serving different purposes. And if you want to see what happens when both kinds of maintenance are disrupted, look at what happens to people who are severely sleep deprived. After about 72 hours without sleep, people begin to hallucinate. They see things that are not there, they misinterpret shadows, hear voices, become paranoid. The boundaries between waking consciousness and dream consciousness start to blur and then collapse. It is as if the dreaming machinery, denied its normal outlet, begins to leak into waking life. The brain insists on dreaming. If you will not let it dream at night, it will start dreaming while you are awake. That is how important the process is. The brain will compromise your waking reality rather than give up its nightly hallucination sessions. A third hypothesis comes from a Finnish researcher named Antti Revonsuo, and this is the one that, to me, ties the neural evidence together in the most satisfying way. He calls it the threat simulation theory. The argument goes like this: the dreaming brain is running a virtual reality simulation, and the primary evolutionary purpose of that simulation is practice, specifically practice at dealing with threats. Look at the evidence. Negative emotions dominate dream content across every culture that has been studied. Fear is the single most commonly reported dream emotion. The most frequent dream scenarios involve being chased, being attacked, falling, being humiliated in front of others, losing teeth, arriving somewhere unprepared, being lost in unfamiliar places. These are not arbitrary anxieties. These map directly onto the kinds of threats our ancestors faced for hundreds of thousands of years: predators, hostile strangers, loss of social standing, physical danger, being separated from the group. And the neural profile we described fits perfectly. The amygdala is jacked up because threat detection needs to be running at full capacity. The body is paralyzed because you do not want to actually flee while lying in your shelter. The prefrontal cortex is suppressed because if you realized it was just a simulation, the emotional rehearsal would lose its force. The whole point is that you need to believe the threat is real. You need to feel the fear genuinely, otherwise the practice does not work. It is exactly like a flight simulator. A pilot practices engine failures in a simulator because the simulator creates a convincing enough experience that the pilot's reactions become automatic. If the pilot could see through the simulation, could lean back and say, "This is fake, I am fine," the training would be worthless. Your brain needs you to be fooled. It disables the very system that could see through the trick, precisely because seeing through the trick would defeat the purpose. And that is the part I find the most extraordinary. Not that the brain dreams, not that it generates imagery or processes emotions, but that it goes to such extraordinary, coordinated, multi-system lengths to deceive itself, to deceive you. Your own brain manufactures a reality, disables your ability to question it, forces your emotional systems to respond as if it were genuine, and then erases most of the evidence when you wake up. Think about the engineering required: the visual cortex generating imagery, the brainstem sending PGO waves, the acetylcholine suppressing the prefrontal cortex, the serotonin and norepinephrine dropping to zero, the motor neurons being inhibited, the amygdala cranking up the fear response. All of it coordinated, every 90 minutes, every night, without your knowledge or consent. And it works. It works because you believe it while it is happening. Every single time. You have had thousands of dreams in your life. Thousands, and in almost none of them did you stop and say, "Wait, this is a dream." The deception succeeds with a reliability that would make any con artist weep with envy. There is an exception, though, and the exception is actually the most revealing part of this whole puzzle. Some people sometimes do realize they are dreaming. It is called lucid dreaming, and when researchers have studied this with brain imaging, they found exactly what you would predict if everything I have told you is correct. During a lucid dream, the dorsolateral prefrontal cortex partially reactivates. The critic comes back online, not fully, not to waking levels, but enough. The dreamer regains some capacity for self-reflection, logical evaluation, and metacognition. And suddenly, the dream feels different. The dreamer can observe the dream as a dream. The hallucination is still running, The images are still there, the emotions are still present, but a new dimension has been added: awareness. The ability to step back and say, I am inside a constructed experience. Gamma wave activity, high-frequency oscillations associated with conscious awareness and integrated perception, increases in the frontal and temporal regions during lucid dreams. It is as if the brain has partially rebooted a system that was deliberately shut down, and the dreamer in that moment exists in a state that is neither fully dreaming nor fully awake, but something in between, a hybrid consciousness. That lucid dreaming is possible at all is the proof of everything I have been saying. The difference between being completely absorbed in a hallucination and stepping back to recognize it as a hallucination comes down to the activity of specific brain regions. Turn those regions off, and you are lost in the illusion. Turn them back on, and you recover your critical faculties. The dream itself does not change. The hardware is the same. What changes is whether the evaluator is running. The difference between delusion and insight, between being fooled and seeing through the trick, is a neurochemical dial. And this right here is where the investigation stops being about sleep and starts being about something much bigger. The brain does not have a single mode of operation. It has several, and in each mode it constructs reality differently. During waking life, you have sensory input streaming in from the outside world. You have the prefrontal cortex online. You have serotonin and norepinephrine providing the chemical scaffolding that holds coherent experience together. The thalamus is open, letting sensory signals through. The motor system is connected to the body, so you navigate the world with a sense of continuity, logic, temporal order, and self-awareness. You feel like a stable person in a stable reality. But even during the day, the boundary between focused consciousness and something dreamlike is thinner than you might expect. There is a network of brain regions called the default mode network, and it activates whenever you are not focused on an external task. When you are daydreaming, staring out the window, letting your mind wander, the default mode network is highly active, and during those moments of mind wandering, the phenomenology starts to shift toward dreaming. Your thoughts become less logical, more associative. Bizarre images pop up, you lose track of time, you start following a thread of thought that makes no particular sense. You have probably caught yourself doing this, snapping back from a daydream and thinking, where did that come from? It turns out that the default mode network is also hyperactive during REM sleep. In fact, brain imaging shows that default mode network activation during REM is even stronger than during waking daydreams. Some researchers now argue that dreaming is essentially mind-wandering turned up to full volume, with the external world switched off and the prefrontal governor removed. If that is right, then the difference between sitting at your desk staring into space and having a vivid dream is not a difference in kind. It is a difference in how far the dial has been turned and how many safety systems are still engaged. But dreaming shows you that every single one of those features, the continuity, the logic, the self-awareness, the sense of a stable reality, is not an inherent property of your mind. These are products of a particular neurochemical configuration. Change the chemistry, and the logic disappears. Change it a different way, and the self-awareness vanishes. Change it again, and the sensory input from the real world is replaced with internally generated imagery that feels indistinguishable from the real thing. Your conscious experience is not a window, it is a construction, and the construction depends on which chemicals are flowing, which circuits are active, and which modules of the brain are online at any given moment. In REM sleep, you become a different kind of mind. And a mind with no skepticism, no stable identity, no logical coherence, no sense of time, but with vivid perception, intense emotion, and absolute conviction that what it is experiencing is real. You are, by every meaningful definition, experiencing something very close to psychosis, not metaphorically. The phenomenology of dreaming, hallucinations, emotional volatility, loss of critical judgment, disorientation, bizarre thought patterns, failure to recognize impossibility, maps almost exactly onto acute psychosis. Some researchers have drawn an even more specific comparison. Dreaming resembles delirium, the acute confusional state seen in medical emergencies and alcohol withdrawal, more than it resembles schizophrenia. The disorientation, the hallucinatory vividness, the rapid shifting between states, the inability to maintain a coherent train of thought, these are all hallmarks of delirium, and they are all hallmarks of an ordinary dream. The only difference is context. The delirium happening to a waking person in a hospital bed is a crisis. The same set of symptoms happening to a sleeping person in their own bed at 2 in the morning is Tuesday night. We pathologize one and ignore the other, but the brain states are strikingly similar, which leads you to wonder, is psychosis the brain dreaming when it should not be? Or is dreaming the brain going briefly, usefully, mad? And here is the thing that should make you profoundly uneasy. How do you know that the version of you sitting here right now, the one that feels rational and grounded and aware, is not also being fooled? Not in the same way, not as completely, but how do you know that your waking consciousness is not just another configuration, slightly more constrained by sensory input, slightly more calibrated by the prefrontal cortex, but fundamentally running the same kind of trick? Because the dreaming brain does not know it is dreaming. That is the whole point. The system that would detect the error has been disabled. And the waking brain, the brain you are using right now to evaluate this idea, is the very brain that would need to detect any errors in its own operation. You are asking the detective to investigate himself. You are asking the storyteller whether the story is true. We know from waking neuroscience that the brain does construct waking experience in ways that are not always faithful to reality. It fills in the blind spot, that hole in your visual field where the optic nerve exits the retina. You have never seen this hole. Even though it is always there, the brain paints over it seamlessly, inventing visual information to fill the gap. It smooths out the jitter of saccadic eye movements. Your eyes are actually darting around 3 or 4 times per second, and each dart produces a blur, but you never see the blur. The brain edits it out and splices the stable frames together like a film editor. It constructs the illusion of a continuous visual field from fragmentary snapshots. It edits the perceived timeline of events so that cause appears to precede effect even when the neural processing happened in the opposite order. There is a particularly wonderful experiment on this point. If you flash a light and play a sound at exactly the same time, but the sound arrives at the brain a few milliseconds before the light, because sound travels slowly and the auditory cortex processes faster, the brain will delay the perception of the sound to make it sync up with the light. You think they happened simultaneously. They did not. The brain edited the tape. And it goes further. Experiments on split-brain patients, people whose corpus callosum has been severed, show that when the left hemisphere is presented with a behavior that was actually initiated by the right hemisphere, the left hemisphere will instantly confabulate a plausible explanation for why it chose that behavior. It does not say, "I do not know why I did that." It makes up a story, and it believes the story. The confabulation is not a lie. It is a genuine failure of self-knowledge dressed up as insight. The brain fabricates reasons and presents them as discoveries. The waking brain is not a camera. It is an editor, a very good editor, one that works so seamlessly you never notice the cuts. But it is editing nonetheless. Dreams just show you the same editor working without the constraint of external data. The editor is still constructing narratives, still generating imagery, still creating the feeling of a coherent reality. It just has no raw footage to work with, so it improvises. And the result is bizarre because the editor, left to its own devices, reveals its biases, its preoccupations, its shortcuts. Dreams are the brain's rough draft written when the fact-checker has gone home for the night. I do not have a tidy philosophical resolution for this. I am a physicist, not a philosopher. But I will say this, the study of dreaming has revealed with laboratory precision and brain imaging data and neurochemical analysis that the human brain is capable of constructing a complete, immersive, emotionally compelling reality with no external input whatsoever. Zero. And the person experiencing that reality has absolutely no idea it is constructed. The dream feels as real as waking life feels. The conviction is total. And the only reason you know the dream was not real is that you woke up and found yourself in a different reality, one that seems more stable and consistent. But seems more stable is doing a lot of work in that sentence. So let me close with what I would call a warning. Not a frightening warning, a scientific one, a physicist's warning. A physicist, the machinery of belief, the machinery of conviction, the feeling that I am seeing reality as it truly is. That machinery is not a reliable reporter. It is a system, like any other system in the brain. It can be tuned up, tuned down, fed accurate data or fabricated data, and it will report confidence either way. The dreaming brain reports total confidence in impossible events. The waking brain reports total confidence in its version of reality. The subjective feeling of "this is real" is identical in both cases. What differs is the input and the neurochemical context, not the mechanism of belief itself. Consider one more piece of evidence, and this one comes from the very beginning of life. A human newborn sleeps roughly 16 hours a day, and about half of that sleep is REM. 8 hours of REM sleep per day. 8 hours of dreaming, or something like dreaming, every single day. As the infant grows, the proportion of REM slowly decreases. By adulthood, it is down to about 20% of total sleep time. By old age, it is less. Why would a newborn need so much REM? The baby has barely any experiences to consolidate. It has no threats to rehearse. It has almost no memories to reorganize. So what is all that REM doing? One intriguing answer proposed recently by the neuroscientist David Eagleman is that REM sleep is defending the visual cortex from being colonized by other senses. The brain is plastic, fiercely competitive at the neural level. If the visual cortex goes quiet for too long, the neighboring auditory and somatosensory regions will invade, repurposing those neurons for hearing or touch. During the long hours of darkness, when the eyes are closed and no visual input is coming in, REM sleep floods the visual cortex with internally generated activity, essentially running a screensaver to keep the territory occupied. The visual system says, "I am still here, these neurons are mine." This would explain why REM decreases across the lifespan. A baby's brain is the most plastic, the most vulnerable to cortical takeover, and therefore needs the most REM defense. An older brain is more stable, with well-established territory boundaries, and needs less. It is a territorial war fought in the dark, and dreams are the signal fires. Whether this theory is ultimately right or not, it highlights something I think is essential. Every hypothesis about dreaming, whether it is memory consolidation, reverse learning, threat simulation, or cortical defense, shares a common premise. The brain has compelling reasons for what it does at night. It is not random, it is not meaningless. The content might be bizarre, but the process is purposeful. Your brain runs these nightly hallucination sessions because something about the process is so important that evolution built dedicated, elaborate, multi-system machinery to make it happen. And it built that machinery to work without your knowledge or approval. Every night, your brain proves to you that it can build a world from nothing and make you believe it completely. It proves that your sense of reality is a construction, not a window. And every morning you forget the lesson and go back to assuming that what you see is what is there. The first principle of good science, and I have said this before and I will keep saying it, is that you must not fool yourself, and you are the easiest person to fool. That is hard enough to manage during the daytime, when your prefrontal cortex is working, and the evidence of the world is streaming in through your senses. But your brain demonstrates every single night that it can fool you completely, utterly, and without any effort at all. It does it routinely, casually, as part of its normal operation. Fooling you is not a failure mode of the brain. It is a feature. So the question is not whether your brain can construct a false reality and make you believe it. We know it can. It does it every night. The question is how much of that capacity is still running during the day, underneath the surface, behind the machinery of waking consciousness, in ways you cannot detect because the detector itself is part of the system. I want to put this as plainly as I can because I think it matters. You walk around all day with a feeling that you are seeing things as they are, not as your brain constructs them, not as your expectations shape them, not as your emotional state colors them, but as they actually objectively, independently are. That feeling of direct access to reality is one of the strongest and most persistent features of conscious experience. And dreaming proves conclusively that this feeling can be generated in the complete absence of an external reality. The feeling of "this is real" is not evidence that it is real. It is evidence that you have a brain that produces that feeling as part of its standard operating procedure, whether the input is genuine or fabricated. You would think this would bother people more than it does. And you would think that knowing you hallucinate vividly every single night, that your brain is provably capable of constructing false realities and generating total conviction in their truth, would make people more cautious about the certainty they feel during the day, more humble about the accuracy of their perceptions, the reliability of their memories, the soundness of their judgments. But mostly it does not. Mostly people wake up, shake off the dream, and go right back to the comfortable assumption that the waking world is solid and their perception of it is accurate. That is a very human response. but it is not a scientific one. Tonight, when you close your eyes and drift off, know that within about 90 minutes, your brain is going to shut down your ability to think critically, generate a vivid hallucination, make you believe it is real, flood you with emotions you did not choose, and then mostly erase the whole thing by morning. And you are going to let it happen. You have no choice. You cannot opt out. And when you wake up tomorrow, ask yourself this: what else might my brain be constructing right now that I cannot see? That is the question. I would very much like to hear what you think the answer is.